Hello
Yeah,
everyone,
I think
thanks
so.
for coming. Hello. There we go. I should have done that. Thank you. Thanks everyone for coming, spending the Friday evening with us. I'm very grateful to have Emma Warren and her work and vibes and energy with us today. I've been doing these yellow squares on the internet now for 18 months, and I wanted to open the kind of architecture and the ideas to other voices, other perspectives, people that I respect, people who are producing great work at the moment. And I wanted Emma to be first because her book, Documenting Culture, I read during lockdown when I was having a rough time, like a lot of us, and it really motivated me to kind of document your thing and really think about some of the work that I've done over the last decade in culture and put more value on it than I'd maybe thought about before. So first of all, it's a thank you for that. Thank you for the work that you've been doing in music and culture for the last 20 years. You're one of my first interactions in the media, music journalism, and it was a positive experience, and that kind of set the bar for what I guess expected inside the music world. So yeah, it's like a thank you first, more than anything. You have a roll call about clubs and dance floors. This talk is going to be about documenting and dance floors at the same time, so we're going to bounce between the two ideas. So should we start there, and then we can get into the squares? Yeah?
Well, the thank you is definitely two-way. When you asked me to do this, I was like, really? Amazing. It's properly, it's not only interesting, but a definite honour for me to be contextualised by you and to see what happens when we put the two different types of thinking we do together, which are rooted in some shared assumptions, and see what happens. So I'm kind of interested in the freestyle that is going to follow. But before that, I'm going to stand for this because when I've been talking about my book, Dance Your Way Home, I've been starting with something called the roll call of honour, and I think it's really important to do this because our dance spaces are so precious. I did this originally when I was talking about Make Some Space, and I would go around and I would ask people, tell me about a place where you felt like you belonged, somewhere like Total Refreshment Centre, which was the subject of that book. And people would sometimes be really baffled, but they would often find somewhere, and I would read it out as a way of showing who is in the room, of documenting who is in the room, and of showing gratitude to those places. And this is done in a similar spirit. So I've since been collecting dance floors, and this is the roll call of honour for today. Bunkin' Pussy at the Africa Centre, early 2000s. My parents' living room on New Year's Eve. Africa Centre, 1987. Drop Studios, Tottenham, 2023. The Alibi, Dalston, is free to get in. 2010 to 2016, it was free to get in. Basement Rotunda, Brunei Gallery, last summer. Village Underground, 2012. Grisou, Bariloche, Argentina. Phonox 2021. Unit 31 before the pandemic, Plastic People. The Eagle Vauxhall on a Sunday night. Le Pub, Newport. Electric, Brixton. Heaven, Corsica Studios. The Connor Hall, Belfast. 25 plus recess at Box Park, Wembley, last summer. Grey Area, Taiwan. My friend's inter-ethnic wedding in South London. Printworks and Dance Tunnel, Dalston. And I would like us all to applaud all the people that made those spaces happen, because they did not happen by accident, and they took a lot of work. Thank you.
Thank you for that. So I've kind of done yellow squares influenced by Emma's writing. Some of it is her word for word, some of it's my interpretation of her words. She hasn't seen any of them, so it's not too surprised. It's like a back-to-back, like a DJ set. So you're a DJ as well, and I won't have you say it or not, by the way.
I do have to clarify there, because the DJ practice is an art form which I do not possess. I can select, and I love to do that, and I love to play records, but that is very different from DJing. So I'm a player recordser.
All right, I'm going to start with this with an argument, but all right.
Yeah, right.
This is mine on your book. Dance is the physical embodiment of optimism, and I wanted to, it's a Friday night, and usually on Friday nights, everyone's optimistic, we finish work, looking forward to the weekend. And some of the time when I've done, I guess, events like this and talking about dance floors and what's past, it leans in towards everything isn't great now, or things were better back in the day. But dance itself is the physical embodiment of optimism. Is that right?
That is an amazing way to condense some of the things that I've been trying to think through with this book. I think it's an incredibly optimistic thing to move your body. It's also an incredibly generous thing because whenever you move, you leak information about yourself. You leak information about who you are, where you've come from, where you're at that day. Are you happy? Are you sad? Are you carrying sorrows? Are you carrying, bubbling up with happiness? All those things, very basic things, are communicated when you move. So it's optimistic in the sense of generosity, which is a sort of optimistic emotion, I think, to dance. I think because I've come to the conclusion that the dance floor is what you might call a technology of togetherness. It's a place that allows us to thicken our relationships. Yeah.
Not planned.
That was for because I didn't see. Yeah. Okay, that's okay. All right, I'm happy.
First banger, reload.
I just got my first gun fingers. All right, that's good. But it is because it really works. There's you can take this from a science point of view. Science has shown that when you take children, and when they move in synchrony with each other, they like each other more afterwards, and we're just grown versions of that. So if we were to, of course we met each other on dance floors. I first kind of encountered you at Forward. I'm pretty sure it was at Forward. You form a kind of bond which is non-verbal, and your bodies kind of accept each other. And here it's so easy to fall into things that sound like you're talking about things that are sexual or erotic, but they're not. They're kind of sensual and they're communicative. And it's different. I think particularly in these kind of countries, Eurocentric countries, it's quite hard to separate sensual or communicative from it just being about sex. And maybe this is a good moment to also say that I think the dance floor is often a place where lots of things get lumped into that don't belong there. If you talk about the dance floor, people often go to drugs, sex, hedonism, immorality, danger. But if you say the village green or the crossroads, which traditionally where people dance together, you don't go to the same things. So the dance floor is an optimistic place because we're saying we can live together, we can get to know each other, we can learn to care about each other, and we can counter the divisions which people put upon us so readily.
Yeah, the way you said you encountered me for the first time. That's an unusual way of saying something like that. But a lot of us met dancing, but not saying anything to each other.
Well, that's why I can't say I met
hello
you. I can't say I met
for
you
ages. You're seeing eye to eye. I must have seen this face before somewhere, and gradually you get to a point where you say hello. Especially us Londoners, it takes a bit of time to warm up, right? And dance is definitely a way of softening that experience.
It's true because someone like Georgina Cook, the photographer who made a brilliant book documenting dubstep times, I can say I met her on the dance floor because someone, Martin Clark, who runs Keysound Recordings, introduced us. Emma, this is Georgie, this is Georgie, this is Emma. So I can say we met on the dance floor at DMZ. There are other people where I wouldn't want to frame it like that because it's not true in the sense of being introduced, but we became familiar with each other. And I think that word familiar also I like because it sounds like family. So we've become familiar with each other. There's so many people that I met during that time or became familiar with by that repetition week by week. Oh, okay, I've seen you before, now you've seen me before, maybe you're going to let on to me now because we've been in the same place a few times. And by becoming a regular, you become part of that community, part of that family, and you can become known and you can know people.
Does it happen to you a lot where people go, how do you know so many people? But it's not that you, I guess, know them, but it's familiarity and that connection that you've had somewhere, and you're kind of this unspoken thing that you've experienced together in a way.
Yeah, you'll know this as well. I guess many of you will know this as well. We don't really have a word for the kind of relationship that we build with people that we have danced with or with whom we've shared what I'm now calling culturally powerful dance floors. Because, I'm saying anywhere we dance is a dance floor. But also, culturally powerful dance floors are different to a kind of like a high street disco. Not that there's even really high street discos anymore, but they're different sorts of places. And I think a culturally powerful dance floor is one where new things can happen. You know, I don't think a lot of new music came out of. The example I was going to give was not a good one. Bonnies in Downham, because new things did come out of that. Or like Langtrees in Beckenham. If I'm thinking, or like the Blue Orchid in Croydon, I'm thinking about the really, really towny sort of clubs that were around when I was growing up. I'm not sure a lot of new music came out of them, but they had their little role to play. But the culturally powerful dance floors are the ones where whole new genres of music can come through, or people can become their DJ selves, their graphic designer selves, their blogger selves. It's a place where you can find the job that you actually need, as opposed to the job that the world thinks you might be good at. But that doesn't really answer your question. That was just like a load of things.
That's good.
But you do being in those places. If someone says to me, "Oh, I went to this same place as you," even if they went at a different time, I feel a sense of kinship. I met someone recently who was like maybe like 15, 20 years younger than me. They'd been a 16-year-old at DMZ who'd managed to like finagle their way in. And immediately I was like, oh, well, we know each other because we've been on the same dance floors. We know some important things.
Straight up. We are a dancing nation because of the youth. This is one of your sentences as well.
Yeah.
So I've lifted this from the Booktube. Do you want to expand on this sentence? I love it.
Before I do, will you tell me why that jumped out at you?
Because until I read the book, I didn't think of England as a dancing nation. I think of like islands and Africa, further afield, maybe just because of my upbringing and the music that I was raised on. So I didn't think of like all of these corners of England as places that everyone's dancing, but of course they are. But it's just, I guess I grew up on reggae and dancehall and soul and all this kind of stuff, but that was just my personal experience, and not so much of that music became popular culture that I couldn't imagine. I'm like, what were they dancing to in, I don't know, the corners of England? I never listened to that music, but the book opened me up to what was happening.
Yeah, it's funny that, because I think there's an idea of Englishness which is to do probably like what you might call a sort of colonial class, or people who kind of partook in that or benefited from it, or it's not even just middle class or upper class, but there's a certain type of Englishness which is about structural power, which obviously in an English context isn't just structural power within one country, it's structural power across many, many countries. And that community is not a community of dancers, broadly. I mean, who was it who said you can either have power or soul?
Ooh.
Someone.
Second reload today.
Does anyone know who said that? You can either have power or soul? Source. It's always nice to kind of, attribute things accurately if possible.
Straight up, we'll put it in the notes.
Yeah, we'll put it in the notes. But I think if you take everybody else, of course everybody else is a dancer. You've got like so much example of dancing in this country, whether it's like 50 years ago past like Northern Soul things, or if you go like I ended up going way back into like Anglo-Saxon times, and people of course were having like Larry alehouse dances. Of course they were, because you're working hard, you're working in the fields. Every 6 weeks or so you're going to need some time to just let off steam a bit, to dance with your friends and family, to like recoup a bit. So yeah. But that, so in a way, that the part of that sentence that jumped out at you really was the word nation, not the word youth.
Yes.
Because when you put it to me like this, it makes me think that there's something which is a subtext in the book and in a lot of my work, but actually you, in this, make me realise it in the foreground, which is, it's not just like we don't do right by our youth and all those kind of things. It's actually the youth, or the people who are young at any moment in time, are really the innovators, aren't they? They're the generators, they're the reflectors, they're the ones who are telling us what is coming. And so the youth are the motor of a kind of national culture or international culture, or even just culture as a response to life and reality. And so you making me look at it like this is giving me a new way of explaining why it's so important that we collectively do better by our young people.
Yeah, and did you use the word youth and not young because of youth being like more like a feeling and more like an energy rather than an age group? Like I'd say everyone in this room has like a youthful spirit because you've come to listen to people talk about dance and documenting things, and I don't know, you're using Instagram clearly and vibes. So there is a youthful energy regardless of age, right?
I think I find the word young people often a little bit patronising. There's something slightly institutional about it. You know, I've done a lot of informal youth work, untrained and improvised. And when you sort of enter those settings, often you're describing young people. And so it's a useful word in some context, but it has a certain kind of, it's sort of demographic separateness, which I don't really love. It's like we've got people, and then you've got young people. You know, they're not. But if you say youth, then we recognise that youth is part of people. And what was the other option that I might have used? Young ones. I quite like young ones.
Yeah.
I use the word ones quite a lot on things.
What else could I have said? Another. I don't know. I guess like everyone's boundaries for what youth and young person is are so different. Especially now, I feel like the previous 2 years were kind of like taken away from people a bit. So it's like extending youth, like up to 30, up to 35, like wherever you want to go with it, because part of it was taken away from people.
Yeah. I mean, basically, it just, and I have to say this, and it sounds like I'm making a joke or something, but I really mean it. I just believe in Whitney Houston, the greatest love of all. I believe the children are the future. And I love Whitney greatly and deeply. But that lyric, it's just true. And that's what I mean about youth being generative. And, it sounds silly, but if we began to think about our youth as an asset, as precious, as valuable, as a kind of entity that needs their own space and their own things and the opportunity to thrive on their own terms because they know things we don't, and a group that also need people that are not so young to advocate for and support and create spaces in which things can happen, then, Whitney said it all, basically.
Yeah. This is a good one.
Yeah, so I was proper proud of that one, yeah.
There's another banger from the book. So youth clubs are culture machine. So I guess in my youth clubs were everywhere. Everyone was kind of part of something, maybe attached to a church or attached to like another kind of cultural institution. There would be like youth theatre, youth sport, but so much of that has been, I guess, been reduced, funding being cut, spaces being lost. But the idea that those were culture machines, I guess I came out of one. Grime was like a youth club culture turned into a culture machine. Again, using these words, like, why did you choose like culture and then machine?
Yeah, I was really, really, really pleased with that phrase. I just love it when, like, years and years and years of work and observation and thinking about things and synthesizing things, it's just like all that stuff just percolates into a phrase. I knew it was true, but I hadn't expressed it that clearly beforehand. And part of it comes from generally recognising that people mistake. Sometimes people think things are charity. And as the dog poet Jean Binter-Breeze once said, aid comes with a bomb. The idea of putting things in the bracket of charity, I think, is a problem in many, many ways, not least because it separates it from us and from the world. It's separate, it's with someone else. It's with some poor people who need something, as opposed to saying, we need something and this is ours. And so the idea of youth clubs as a culture machine came from me trying to find ways to explain things that are cultural, not charitable, and trying to move away from a charitable context for a lot of things which are actually just people coming up with brilliant solutions in their own communities for things which are needed. I also I love it when I'm listening to music, like lyrics, even if I'm not listening to lyrics, a good lyric will just pop out at me. So my ears are listening for lyrics all the time. And that was just a lyric that kind of came to me because I wanted to make sure I had those little phrases that people could lift and do something with, because one of my main intentions for the book was to give people architecture and framework and language to be able to move this on in whatever way people want to or need to. Youth clubs are culture machines, blatantly. Why is it so invisible?
Like I said, you said that people have been othered, right? It's someone else's problem. It's like, okay, this thing that happens over there doesn't filter into, like, quote unquote real life. It's so strange.
And it's a really difficult one to wrestle with because we don't have much language for it at all. And when you're saying about youth clubs being reduced, the truth is people talk about cancel culture, but the main thing that has been cancelled is youth provision. You know, we really want to talk about what has been lost, what has been ruined, what has been destroyed, what has been purposefully got rid of by Tory governments, successive Tory governments, and we need it back. And it's not right that it's gone. Over 700 youth clubs last time I looked over the last few years. Thousands of youth work. That's like countless thousands of young people not having the opportunity to go somewhere warm, safe, mostly funny, where they're around adults who broadly like them and respect them, and who crucially don't need anything from them.
Yeah, that's super important. I think, I guess the youth clubs in my area, I feel like that was something that squashed problems. Like, you knew kids from other schools, you did stuff with them. Whereas I guess now a lot of young people might not know each other as well, just because they don't have those touch points in the same way. Maybe you have touch points online, like we're saying about dance floors. I guess there's less clubs, there's less all these kind of communal spaces. But having that, you know, say like the youth club up to big club is like a good kind of journey as a young person, right?
Absolutely, starter packs.
Yeah. So if your first experience in a room listening to music in a big way is at 18 or 19, that would be like really overwhelming. I felt like I was going out from 13 or something or 14 to events where we danced with other kids and from all over the area, and that was just normal. Whereas people do that much later in life now, and I don't know. I feel like that's a shame.
I mean, the process of tracking some of the invisible ways that youth clubs have quite literally been culture machines, and the more that I'm looking into it, the more amazing things I'm finding. Just some like very, very direct and incontrovertible ways that they provided foundations for so many things. You talked about grime there, and places like Oxford House. There was a whole like network of youth clubs that people would go to. I remember I interviewed Dizzy when he was about 16, I think. He was round his mate's house playing PlayStation, did a phone interview. And he was like, yeah, the first time I ever DJ'd was under the name Dizzy D at Youth Club playing jungle. So, that's just like one example that comes to mind. But I think within grime, there's a whole subsection of the story which is undertold, which is about the way that those spaces really fed into the culture just as strongly as the pirate radio stations did.
Yeah, like Youth Club was like the first pirate radio station. Like Youth Club, then pirate radio, then club, like as a bit of a journey. I wrote this myself, and I guess the way these words have been used and co-opted by, I guess, corporates in the last decade makes them like harder to maneuver, like sometimes. So like I wrote, culture was the word of the 10s and community is the word of the 20s. And sometimes in your work, I think, could you change community for culture or culture for community, or do you view those things as way different? Or how much overlap do you think there is between these,
I think one is just a reflection of the other. I think communities generate the culture which they need. I think communities generate the culture which life causes. Almost like culture is the output of life's input, I think. And I think everything is cultural. There's this woman from the 1930s who I've found as like a kindred spirit from the past, Josephine McAllister Brew. She wrote about youth work. And she said something like, everything is culture. I can imagine her in a 1930s voice. Fish and chips is culture. But I thought, she's a kindred spirit. We know the same things, even if we're in different, moments of the time-space continuum. And so I think everything is cultural, and I think culture is just culture is almost like the expression of community, isn't it? What are we going through? What do we have to be glad about? What is causing us trouble? And all those things are expressed in culture. So I don't see them, I think that they relate to different types of thing, but they are, yeah, like truly interlinked, like music and movement, they're kind of expressions of each other.
And I guess like those saying about corporations kind of co-opting these words, has that changed your kind of view of them, or like has it made you find other kind of terminology? Because it's hard to, sometimes I think, oh, we're forming a culture, like what we're doing today is like my community or something like that. But then when I hear like a big brand using the same words for things that we do for just for the people, and just, you know what I mean, free entry and that kind of vibe, it's not the same as what they're doing. I mean,
I've sort of made a decision that I'm just not going to bother with anything that isn't directly related to. I'm just not going to bother with. When I say up there, by up there I mean kind of the corporate world. I don't really have much interaction or connection with that world currently, and I'm sort of just. I haven't got any spare capacity to bother about what they do, because also I can't change that, I can't affect that. So I've just kind of dialed back and made my intentions really local, really low resource, and absolutely about digging where I stand. What resources do I have around me? What communities am I part of? And operating absolutely there. So brands are going to do what they want. You know, obviously I spent a long time working with the Red Bull Music Academy, hosting interviews. And every single time I'd ask myself, should I be doing this? Is this really morally right? Is this like a particular situation? And every time I'd come back and think, yes, because the work is really good and the things we're doing are important, and we are talking to artists and we're taking the artist's perspective directly, and that is going in the archive and we're bedding in some important stories. So the corporate part of it, I don't really have a view on. Maybe that's it.
Yeah, that's cool. So I wrote this. The difference between telling a story and owning a story. I guess you've gone into different spaces and told stories about different music scenes and people, cultures, communities over the last 20 years. How do you not detach, but how do you tell a story without ownership and letting people have it without, not just without, I guess some of it you have to travel with to carry it, but then do you draw a line somewhere? Like how do you do that? How do you wrestle with this? I think we all do in some way.
See, there's a lot of different things coming into my mind when you're saying that. Specifically to this, I think some of that is to do with intention. I can't own any of these stories. I mean, you know, the book that I've just made, Dance Your Way Home, I did write it and make it happen with the help of, you know, editors and copy editors and all the people who, like, I would ring up and go, I'm really worried about this chapter, will you have a look at it? Or, you know, all sorts of different support and assistance, but it's got my name on it. But I can't possibly own it because it's the precious life material of all the people who spoke to me or were part of it, and it's the precious life material of all the people that made all the dance floors, and it's the precious life material that went into all of it. I cannot possibly own that, and I would absolutely hate to think that I would overstep the mark there. It's not mine. It is ours, and I have done something with it. I think sometimes when people try and be definitive, I think I'm not interested in that either, because that's also about ownership. It's saying, I have the definitive version, and I find that unbelievably patriarchal, and I'm not interested in that at all, so I think it's impossible. So I'm not interested in that. I think there's a subtext which I'm always aware of in everything I do, which is about me navigating my whiteness in cultural situations which are often generated by people who experience racism predominantly. And I think that's a tricky one in many ways, but that makes it extra important that me, with this face, in this body, is extremely careful to the degree to which I can be about recognising the wrongness of trying to own anything that I'm already benefiting from. This is also making me think about the kind of spaces that I'm attracted to, and I was thinking about this on the way here because I think what it comes down to is, I think the work I've always made is to do with situations which are generated by people who need it for some reason. And some people need it because of structural racism, some people need it because of homophobia, some people need it because of any other isms which affect them, and some people just need it because of what's going on in their life or whatever. And I know that I have needed those spaces greatly in my own life, but I don't share the same needs as some of the people who have been foundational in making the spaces that I particularly have benefited from. So I think this question is relevant for everybody, but it's particularly relevant for people like me who are lucky enough to be take part in communities often built by people that experience racism or other oppression, but aren't necessarily of that community. And I don't know, did anyone go and see Travis Alabanza's Sound of the Underground? Did anyone go and see that? Yeah, okay. Do you remember the bit where the person who's hosting kind of says to the audience, okay, hello to all, something like, hello to all my like LGBTQI people, make some noise. Any white straight people here? Like, do you feel comfortable? And then someone's like, yeah. And then the person who's hosting just says, yes, that's how privilege works, isn't it? The fact that you're welcome.
That's cold.
Anyway. Yeah, exactly. It was a great moment. I did not do it justice in any shape or form, but it's and again, that was just, for me, that's a useful thing to be able to repeat back, because that is how privilege works. And then those of us who experience that must make sure that we're kind of checking our decisions about what we do against the fact that it's just much easier to be welcomed.
And I guess like adding a layer, that's why it's important that there's many documentations of the same things. Yeah. It's like you tell a story about Total Refreshment Centre, and there should be many. There shouldn't just be yours. There should be many books, photos. Obviously, music has been created. Stories will be told in 5, 10 years about that period of time, and they'll be different because they'll mean different things at different times. And you know, when I've, I guess, published work and my perspectives on certain things and tried to write about the past, I'm writing it, you know, in 2023 with these experiences and whatever privileges I have now, and I look at maybe things I've experienced before with completely different eyes, and it would be interesting, like let's just say the Questa Grime experience, if you had more perspectives from the floor, you know, from the MCs, from the DJs, from the producers, from the parents, from the people that haven't historically had a voice.
Grandparents. I think that's I mean, but all those things, you're absolutely right, and often there is a kind of thing about the sort of job role that many people who don't experience racism, white people, take within these communities is often the documentation, and so there's a sort of sense of that makes it even more important that lots of other people make it their business to like collect things, find things, tell stories, capture little bits of information at the time, and then just put it away somewhere because it's going to be necessary later. And the different, that kind of multiplicity of experiences are really important, and it's hard to do it retrospectively also because some of the most important people can very easily get lost, and we don't want that.
Straight up. We said this on the phone, important isn't important. So sometimes when we talk about spaces, we say, oh, this important cultural space, this important, this, and who gets to determine what is important, who is important, what should be recorded? And you used the word at the start, powerful, and powerful is more important than important. Does that make sense?
I think so. I mean, I think you're talking about, it's all important, isn't it? You know, like if you have a space that you love, or a dance floor that you love, or a story that you want to tell, that makes it important. I did a bit of work with these students at Liverpool St John's University, which was a kind of document your culture thing, and I was asking them to think about what communities they were part of, and in the beginning people are like, oh, I don't know. But then it's like, this one person, their family were like 8 generations deep as truck drivers. That's an amazing kind of particular cultural community that this person knew about because she was in that family. Someone else had a deaf sibling. Someone else used this particular space that was about to be turned into, you know what, flats, whatever. And so if you take this dig where you stand idea, which comes from a Swedish guy called Sven Lindqvist, who used this idea to teach factory workers how to document their workplaces so they could better advocate for wages and so on. If you look around you, you think, what communities am I part of because of where I live, because of who I am, because of my life experience? You know, I'm part of a community of people that grew up with a disabled parent, or you know, who have siblings or young carers. So I'm part of that community, and that's not necessarily something that you would know about me if I hadn't chosen to write about it a bit. But they're also my people, and we know things that other people might not know. So I think it's really useful to know that your own cultural stories matter, and important isn't important in that sense. You don't have to have been at a cool nightclub when new music was being generated every single week. Oh, actually, me too. Like we've been at, or maybe lots of you have been at. Your own cultural life is important, and if you can, tell a story of it.
Yeah, like it doesn't need to be like anointed by anyone else. It's like if it's important to you, it's important.
And it doesn't even have to be seen by anybody else yet. Imagine what it'd be like, you know, in 10 years' time if you, for example, the truck driver example, maybe there's no more trucks anymore. And suddenly someone found this collection of like photographs or interviews with truck drivers under someone's bed that someone had bothered to collect at the time. I mean, there's books of like, you know, working women in Hackney in the 1960s, just interviews with all these women who had jobs that don't exist anymore. And they're so beautiful to read. And you feel all these connections between now and then and past and future. So I think if you're, it's a lovely thing to do. Because every time you tell a story about something, you're also telling a story about yourself, because you can't make it without putting yourself in it, because you're doing it. You're bringing you with you. And so it can also be a really nice way of understanding who you are and where you come from. And that's useful for everybody.
Thank you. Capturing a moment doesn't mean you need to publish that moment. So capturing a moment doesn't mean you need to publish that moment. And especially now, it doesn't mean you need to publish it in the moment as well.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's just definitely not a good idea to. If we're thinking about spaces, or if we're thinking about community activity which is like not favourable to those who have structural power, particularly the police, don't publish it. We don't want to imperil anybody. We don't want to cause any extra problems to things. So certainly there is a question to ask about whether or not it's sensible to publish things, whether or not it's safe to publish things. I was thinking about the police response to the like terrible tragedy that happened at Brixton Academy. You know, it's awful to think about those two women who lost their lives. Awful. And yet, you see something different in the response to this space than you do other environments where other people have also awfully lost their lives in crush situations, for example, football stadia. If there's a crush at a football stadium, no one says, well, the whole stadium's got to close down the end and turn it into flats. It wouldn't happen. So I think that's a kind of side note to what we're talking here, but I think, you know, all the people here, you're probably people with your own forms of power and ability to talk to people and explain to people why these places matter. And it is useful to begin to have some ways of explaining. People treat these community spaces differently than they treat other spaces, and here is a concrete example.
Thank you. There's a lot when you've been capturing over the last 20 years that you've not put in the world, and like how much do you think it's just gone forever, or do you think there's things that you'll revisit in time and be like, okay, maybe that actually means something now? You were talking about interviewing house DJs in the 90s. Maybe there was things that haven't been surfaced for since the magazine days, but then now it'd be helpful for people to see.
I mean, there is something, this is one thing that's so lovely about having a long view. Sometimes when people say to me, oh my God, I can't do anything more, like I'm nearly 30. It's like, it's all fine. It doesn't matter, you can be 25, you can be 55, it's all fine. If you want to do something, do it. Don't let kind of worries about being too young or too old or too this or too that stop you. the thing that you're talking about, so what that means is I'm pleased to have the long view that I have, and I have tried to inhabit the anomalousness of being me, knowing these things, because I know it is a bit anomalous. But I also have to be proud of it, because if I'm not proud of it, who's going to be, frankly. But when I was in my mid-20s, me and my friends started a magazine which was called Jockey Slut Magazine. The name is kind of sounds very off-key now, but I didn't have any problems with it at the time because I knew it related to like boys, young men who just would stand by the DJ booth and just constantly try and work out what tracks were being played. That's what it referred to. I felt no sense of offence at all. But obviously I have to explain it now because now it's like, jockey what? I used to tell my granny that I didn't tell her what it was called. I had to make up a name for it. It's like, it's called just the
From disc jockey.
Yeah, exactly. But I took it upon myself in the magazine to do a column called Heroes of House, where I interviewed key people from Chicago and Detroit. So this would have been like, I think we started the magazine in 1994, so probably around that time, a couple of years after that. So I was just like, who are all the people that I bought records of? Marshall Jefferson, Kevin Saunderson, Jamie Principal, Romanthony, Derek May, all the people basically. Because I definitely did grow up feeling like I lived in an outpost of Chicago. It was that sort of suburban Southeast London, massively into house music. You definitely felt like you lived a bit near Chicago. And I found evidence for that, which was amazing. A video from a party my friend put on where someone actually said that. Like, broadcasting from Chislehurst Caves on the outskirts of Chicago. That's what someone actually said then. It's documentary culture, do you know what I mean? Like, they didn't have to publish it then. And now it's there for me to prove that we actually did think that.
You mentioned it in the book as well, like say, like 6,000 miles away from school, but next door.
Exactly. And I was so pleased. I found that quite late, and it was like, oh my God, what a gift. But the what was I just saying about before that? Chicago. I don't know, something about.
Well, just
Heroes of House. I'm sorry, that just got slightly too convoluted. But so I interviewed all these people, wrote columns. At the time, it felt like they were really from the olden days, but they were from like 5 years before or something. And it was a real treat for me to be able to speak to them. A lot of those artists, or some of them, didn't really speak to journalists, but because I was part of a publication which was very clearly rooted in the dance floor, I was deemed acceptable. And it would be interesting to revisit some of those as well, and see what people were saying then. How were artists explaining themselves? How was I contextualising people? How were we? And maybe give those a bit of life again.
Yeah, it'd be funny, like there's probably two extremes where people would be like, house music forever, or I'm not sure if this thing's gonna last.
Yeah, loads of that. I think I remember sending you once something where I found some like record review from 1991 where people are like, yeah, house music's over, house music's dead. It's all about like ambient hardcore now, or whatever it was. Yeah.
Musicians aren't the only people who make music. I like that.
Okay, what do you mean by that?
Well, again, my reference point for that is, I guess, sound system culture. Without people in the room, it's a different thing. Like people putting their hands on the decks, screaming for reloads, then that kind of going through into jungle and garage and grime. People picking up the mic, passing it around. People that weren't recording anything, but had something to say or something to contribute to add to the vibe. And now I saw that at a good time for myself when I just like made an album as well, like as a kind of like non-musician person.
So it was useful you made in one day?
Sorry?
The album that you made in one day?
Yeah, we recorded it one day. It was like written over a week. With Jams. I want to shout out to Jams. And just short story. Just I got the idea for the album just after speaking to Emma in February, and I was like, why don't I just put the squares in MC form and song form, so I can like DJ the writing, which sounds like absurd, but I can promise you it bangs. It's out next month. All right, enough plugs for me now.
But no. But didn't you also am I right in this? When Butters first started, is this right that the first Terror Danger release?
Yeah.
He made when he was on the phone to you?
Yeah, so I was talking through what I thought would be good ideas on the phone. And yeah, like 9-hour phone call. So it's like a bit of me and a bit of him, and it's like, is this what you mean? Is this what you mean? For like, yeah, literally a whole afternoon into evening into the middle of the morning, and two of the ideas were created like that. And then we released the stems for it, and then let people remix it. This is like 2010. This was like innovation at the time, and that invited all these other people that were just starting to experiment with production themselves as well to like contribute and like make remixes. And we discovered like a whole bunch of producers that went on to like sick things through that thing.
So yeah, this is one of the reasons why I've always massively respected what you do and how you do it, because it's just like, you know, that seemed like a nuts thing to do at the time. Nobody was really doing that. This was not a normal thing to do at the time, but you did it, and loads of things happened from it. And you know, I had a radio show in the early 2010s, linked to the Rebel Music Academy every Friday night, and recorded it in London Bridge. And you and Will Skilliam came on, and I was trying to listen back to it before this, but I couldn't find it. But I did find a fireside chat that you did with RBMA a couple of years later, in which you said something which is so perfect because it relates to that. But it also relates to all the things you do now, which is something like, you said something like, just because you put a record out doesn't mean it's finished. Oh. And that intention is still so present, that like iterative recognition that things are constantly shifting and that it's impossible to finish anything. You have to make a thing and put it out, but that it can be added to or shifted or evolved. I think it's such a generous way of working, and actually such a real way of working as well. It's like true improvisation. And it was so, I don't know, I just thought it was very cool to find you in the past saying exactly the same things as you in the now.
That's crazy. I didn't know that was, I'm like a broken record saying something.
Consistent, you might say.
Yes, all right, consistent, I'll go for it.
Should I tell you what I think, what that makes me think of? That makes me think of a person that I discovered through writing Make Some Space, which I did in 2019, kind of by accident. I was just going to interview 10 people about Total Refreshment Centre, and then kind of 18 months later I'd somehow written a book. But through that process I found another kindred spirit from the past, which was a man called Christopher Small. And he had this concept called musicking, which was the process of making music as opposed to the finished thing. And so often, mostly it is musicians who make the finished thing, but everybody is musicking. So if you're, you know, like clapping, making some noise, putting the chairs out, tidying up afterwards, doing the door, and dancing, you're musicking. And so I think this idea is an idea of musicking, that by our contribution, we are contributing to the music, even if we're just listening really, really, really attentively. And I'm also thinking of the Chicago musician Angel Bat-Dawid, who's part of the International Anthem kind of crew. She and I collaborated, which is so amazing. She made me a piece of music in response to Make Some Space called Transition East, which was her Total Refreshment Centre. It's an amazingly beautiful piece of music, and I'm very proud to have been part of its emergence. But I heard her once say, what I do is supernatural, what I do is extraordinary. It is supernatural, it is extraordinary. Everybody, I need you to make some music, even if it's just banging spoons together. And what she's saying there, my interpretation of it is that she's an exceptionally skillful person doing something ordinary and natural, and that she recognised that it's better if we all do it, because if we stick her over in a corner and say, you're the special one, you're the extraordinary, supernatural one, we are removing ourselves from the possibility of contribution. It's unfair to her. Why should she have to do all the work? She has to do all the work. It's not fair. And that the music sounds better when we all do it. You know, I was about to quote a Stardust track there. The music sounds better with all of us.
Straight up.
Not just you.
Thank you. I love the idea of a future where documenters become an explicit part of the culture. I guess like my reference point with this is when I first came into music, there was like journalists and bloggers and people writing about culture that felt so separate to the people that were making stuff. And I feel like obviously now everyone's producing content of some form, so things have got closer together. How do you, I don't know, like how do you feel like about the current idea of what music journalism is? I guess this is music journalism, DJing is music journalism, everyone recording and documenting is music journalism of some form, but I think how we used to frame it was music journalism was this thing that people did writing for magazines, but like the evolution of it now is kind of what we're doing today, right?
Maybe. I think this is a quote from Lauren Zacchello, isn't it, the keyboard player? He posted this, and I just remember feeling such a, like, I can only describe it as like identity glow. You know, like, oh, someone thinks we're important and we're being positioned as like relevant as opposed to just annoying. If you think about the word journalism, the word journal, the word to, you know, if you write a journal, you're just kind of documenting what happens. So maybe we are bringing the idea of journalism closer to the idea of journaling and just to documenting our culture. And that it's not just for the journalists, just like the music making isn't just for the people with the amount of skill as Angel Backdoor Weed. Maybe the journalism is for any of us who choose to journal. But I think there has been a change, and I'm really, really happy to have been able to contribute to this change in understanding, or the architecture, or the language, or the framing. It's like this thing's always been here, but I feel like I have been able to contribute to a framing which will allow people to say, oh, I'm documenting my culture. And it's, you know, I will have gathered from many, 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 many people the ability to synthesise that phrase. It's not mine, it's ours. I got it from someone who I'm giving it to other people. So again, it's come through me, but it's not mine. And I think we're kind of there, really, aren't we?
I think so.
Cool.
Like this, I guess, you know, when you introduce yourself, what do you say now? Do you just say you're a writer? Like,
how do I say what I am?
Yeah, if you just...
It's still a bit difficult.
Yeah.
Now I can say, well, I'm a writer, or I'm an author, or
a published author.
I write books. But then it's different. You know, I find that is, I think it's a difficult question. It's probably a difficult question for everybody here because, well, there's lots of things to that. I mean, the question of how do I afford to be an author is a very live one. The question of how do we afford to do any of these things is a very live one. And it probably feels relevant to say, you know, my book came out within a week. It was like Sunday Times Book of the Week, and then it became an Amazon bestseller, and it was like number 1, 2, and 3 in all these Amazon charts. And then on the same day, it's like my card gets declined in the co-op, you know. But in a very small way, and I know that I'm not experiencing the same financial pressures as many other people. But this is also important to say out loud, because all of this is also dependent on us having enough capacity to be able to do any of this work. And if all of our capacity is taken up with how am I going to pay the rent again? How am I going to buy any food again? Or just being really worried about people who are, you know, worried about yourself and worried about your loved ones and worried about everybody, there's not a lot of room for this. But making is so essential, it's so functional, and it's so important that we need to make sure that we can support each other to have the space to do it if we can, because times are exceptionally hard.
True. Sweet Machine is the label, so this is like my remix of a saying that I used to use. Like I used to use Buzz as the label.
Oh my God.
Our label, and you created and put your work onto Bandcamp, which is not the usual space that you put books on, and that's where I bought the book too. I was like, oh, you put a book on Bandcamp? Yeah, I'm buying that. Yeah, straight. I thought that was quite cool. Do you want to say what the process was and why and all these things?
First of all, I think this might be like the best thing that's ever happened to me. That is just like, thank you. That is really amazing. I put my book on Bandcamp because that's where I buy things, and I wanted to be on Bandcamp because that's where I buy things. But it also, in order to be on there, I felt like I had to put something audio on, which is why I made the audio book, and which is why I asked people to respond to the book, which is why the Angel Backdoor Weed track happened. So I wanted to sell the book on Bandcamp. In order to do that and feel legit, I had to have some music. I write songs for my nieces sometimes, but I'm not a musician. So I asked a few people to make me a song. I asked Angel, I asked Wonky Logic did one for me for another one, Lunch Money did one, Mikey from Snapped Ankles, various people made a tune for me in response to the book so I could put it on Bandcamp. So in a way, the decision to do that required me to do some other things which I'm now really pleased exist. Like, go back and listen to it. Transition East by Angel Bat-Dawid is just like a stunningly gorgeous piece of music by every single way of measurement. So I kind of I don't know how to publish books. I've never published books before. I don't really know how to run a record label, but I sort of had a bit of an idea from interviewing loads of people over the years. And I had this idea of my book as Make Some Space as a white label, and that I would take my white label around to the shops. I was, inspired by all those people who did that, and I learned from them. It's not the same, but I learned it was possible to do that, and I took that encouragement and I walked into bookshops and just said, can I speak to the person that does the buying? I've made a book. Which was like properly embarrassing, because immediately when you do that in a bookshop, people are like, oh my God, who's this nutter? I don't want to talk to you. And people would look at my book and they'd look at it and they'd go, oh, it looks quite good. Really baffled, like, oh, yeah, really? Oh, you made this. So there was this disconnect. But I thought also it meant that the thing would be like the thing. This is about people fabricating a whole universe with the resources they had at the end of their fingertips. And I had to do it the same way. Paid for it with my credit card, took it around to shops and sold it on Bandcamp. And so I definitely learned from people who I'd encountered on dance floors like the ones we met at DMZ and Forward and those kind of places.
Yeah, just kind of take it in. And I guess that's like something that all writers, anyone producing work, just having ownership over the full process, like just so you see it and experience it and know what it's like. It's not for the result, or you're not going to compete with Faber or Universal or something, but just actually just knowing what that feels like, knowing what it's like to talk to someone across, in a record shop or in a bookshop, and even just face to face with someone, like, hey, like, I made something, do you want to check it out and read it or something? And
this is probably a good moment to show you something else. So currently there are like two things on the Sweet Machine Bandcamp. There's Make Some Space, and then there's Document Your Culture, that is Sweet Machine 002. And then this is Sweet Machine 003. It says it on the back. Sweet Machine 003. It's not on Bandcamp or it's not on anywhere because I just made 30 copies. I went to Cushendale in the Glens of Antrim recently in Northern Ireland, just a couple of weeks ago. And I just decided that I was going to write a poem every day. And so I did. And I want to caveat all this by saying I'm not a poet, but this is not an environment where I should be saying that. No. This is an environment where I should be saying, I just wrote a poem every day because I wanted to, because someone told me that poetry is functional, songwriting is functional, making things is functional, and so I did. And then I just really loved it, and they just flew out of me. And then I thought, I'll make it while I'm there. So I got this woman who's actually from Brockley, who lives in the Glens of Antrim, to print it out for me. And then I went to the local spa, and they didn't have any kind of bulldog clips, so instead I had to get paper clips. And then I photocopied it in the local shop in the place, and then I gave one out to each of the people who were in the poems, because it's kind of about my observations about this village and being there and all the people that I met, and loads of the people I met ended up in the poems. And so I just kind of, before I left, went round, I checked with everyone, they were happy with how I'd represented them, and then I just gave them out. And that was a bit embarrassing as well, because it meant I had to explain myself. I've written a poem and you're in it. Of course, because it's Northern Ireland, there's a different relationship to poetry and literature. It's a kind of not as Philistine type environment. And so people were like, oh, cool, you've written a poem, wicked, would you like to read it? And I ended up having to read one of them in a session in the back room of a pub called Johnny Joe's, where everyone else is doing traditional Irish music as part of the Flower, which is just like a celebration where all the best musicians come. And I was sitting there with my friend, and at some point someone in the room said, so, the girls in the tower, that's how we were known. The girls in the tower, do you have a song for us? And I was like, I haven't got a song. I haven't got a song. And they said, well, have you got a poem? So I ended up reading one of my poems out in the pub in front of like loads of musicians. But that's in the spirit, isn't it? It's in the spirit of the thing. And so, reading a poem to a very drunk man at 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon on the corner of the step of the central pub because he's in it, was a really amazing way to share what I'd made. And I loved it. And so now I've got, Sweet Machine 003. It looks kind of tatty, but I'm really proud of it. And, nothing more has to happen apart from that. But it's just reminded me how joyful and how functional it is to make things.
Thank you. What happens if you don't tell the story? So I guess like all of us witness things, experience things, and most obviously goes unrecorded, kind of captured. Are there things that you've been part of that you just have never told the story, not for any like traumatic reasons, but just haven't got around to it yet, that you want to down the line?
Well, I'll answer this first a different way, which is by, so maybe after I say this, remind me if you want me to say something more or different.
Sure.
But I'm thinking about Dr. Michael Riley, you know, a kind of leading academic part of the base culture work that happened at the University of Goldsmiths in Westminster a few years ago. And I went to a talk that he did, and he said, if it's not in the archive, it didn't happen.
Ooh.
Yes. Very sobering. And he was talking predominantly to an audience of South Londoners who had come up through sound system culture, most of whom had experienced racism. And it really hit me. It hit me hard and hit me strong, and I took it as an instruction. If it's not on the archive, it didn't happen. And I kind of, I don't know, sometimes maybe you feel it the same way. You receive a comment as an instruction, I certainly do, but I've got a massively overdeveloped sense of responsibility. It's partly to do with having been a young carer, I think, but it doesn't matter whether or not you've got an overdeveloped sense of responsibility. It's just good to know that actually you can take an instruction, the permission doesn't need to be explicit. If you feel it, do it. So if you don't tell the story, maybe it didn't happen.
Thank you. This is one of my favourite lines. I had to put your name on it just so it just sticks. Right? Stories create a long view. Stories can act as blue plaques. Like we got to blue plaque each other, and I guess like that. I don't even know where they come from. I don't even know who awards blue plaques. But I guess like today is like your yellow square plaque from me for this environment. So. Yeah, do you want to expand on what you meant by that?
Yeah, again, like I'm just feeling really like properly humbled by all of this because, well, for lots of reasons, but yeah, I'm definitely, just to say that out loud, that is like humbling on quite a big level. I think when I wrote that, that's from Document Your Culture, isn't it? I feel very strongly about all of this. I feel very aggrieved that there are so many important parts of our collective culture, South London, London, kind of UK-wide, which are just ignored, made invisible, not valued, and I know how valuable they are, and they should be extremely visible. And so the blue plaque struck me as a vehicle through which we already know how to do this. I mean, I think it's Nubian Black, isn't it? Or is it the organisation who do the alternative blue plaques? Is that what they're called? Yeah. Yeah? Thank you. Nubian Jack? Yeah. And they're already doing kind of brilliant work about using that method to create an alternative series of blue plaques. But I kind of feel like that idea of blue plaquing each other is nice. I mean, Lee Darkside, who someone else I met on the dance floors at DMZ and Forward, he made his own blue plaque for where Plastic People was and just kind of went and put it outside the building. It was a temporary thing, and he just made a video of it, but the video is the blue plaque. There has been a blue plaque now on that building which said something like, Forward, dubstep history happened here. So maybe there are literal blue plaques that we can allocate places. Certainly the place, you know, we spoke about this beforehand, the shop where Shaka had the shop that Shaka had in New Cross, or maybe some of the places where he ran dances in and around Lewisham should absolutely have a blue plaque, because you know that man's passing is a really sobering moment in so many ways, but it's also an opportunity to recognise how much that Jar Shaka and all the people, all the men and women that generated sound system culture created the foundations of everything that followed. And we have so much to be grateful for. And I kind of think that's where the blue plaque should start.
Thank you. That's the last couple of these. This is a good one for everyone. Having zero experience is a bonus. This is in terms of documenting things, starting things, getting things going, closing apps, making things.
I mean, I really believe this, but I didn't think it was a particularly strong thing to say. Although I was in a bit of a strong mode when I wrote it. There's a certain kind of mode that I'll get into, and I have to sort of inhabit it in a body language way as well, which is a bit like, yeah. And so that was one of them. Partly that comes from, sort of 6 years working at Live magazine, which was a youth-run publication. Our music editor might have been 15, our editor might have been 19, and just working in an environment where it was very important that my whole everything constantly communicated the normalness of possibility. It's normal for you to be here. It's normal for you to be a music editor when you're 14. It's normal for you to make your own magazine. It's normal for you to tell your story, and your story matters. So there's a sort of like, it's like a slightly, moody bossiness, which I'm inhabiting to say these things. But there's the writer Kieran Yates, when she read that, she messaged me and said that was one of her favourite lines in it. Her book, All the Houses I've Ever Lived In, is just out recently, and she's in all of my books. She appears constantly, happy to consider her a sort of co-conspirator. But she said to me, that's a really funny thing to say, and that's a really strong thing to say, and like lol, gatekeepers or something. So I was pleased that she responded like that, because it made me think, that's a good sentence.
Yeah, definitely. And there's so many methods of capture. Like there's so many. I guess a lot of the questions I get at lectures or talks like these are like, should I do this or should I try? I'm like, yeah. Like before people even finish, because I don't know what it's gonna land you on, but it's gonna land you something positive for trying.
And also, doing it properly is only going to lead you to doing it like it's been done before. Do it improperly. Do it wrong. That's how new things happen.
Straight up. Pass this on to someone who needs it is a good line. I actually left my version out over there that I bought, so someone can take that. And I left a camera on that side, like a little disposable, so documenting. I left some stickers out for everyone. Pass it on to someone who needs it. All those messages and all the kind of thoughts in the book. What in particular can we pass on to someone who needs it?
Well, I'm just really all about signal. I've received so much signal in my life from different people and been receptive to it, and I'm just passing it on. I receive a lot of signal from you. I receive a lot of signal, and I can see some people here from whom I receive a lot of signal. Even you being here is giving me a lot of signal, and I kind of hear that in an echo of a sound system dance that I never attended. Give me some signal. Communicate to me. Tell me how this is. Tell me who you are in this moment. And so pass this on to someone who needs it is an explicit way of saying, pass on the signal that you have. Pass this on if you want. That's lovely. I'm really into kind of communities of contribution and sharing. But more importantly, pass on the signal of optimism and possibility and generosity and making, and just how functional and useful and generous it is to make stuff. It's not about being good.
Thank you.
It's about just doing it.
There should be like a shoe brand that takes on that. Make loads of money. So I guess that we kind of like circle back around like dancing, documenting, culture, community, all these things. And I wrote this square and just sent it to you out of the blue because the work was on my mind and it was kind of bouncing around my head. And it was like a mashup of your two words, and then I've been using this Ting word for a while. So I was like, okay, how do you bring these things together? Like what a back-to-back would be. And I don't know, I thought there's like something interesting about like what collaborations look like between writers, between thinkers, between people out here capturing stuff. And this was just an idea that I had that I thought would be good to start with you. So documenting. Thank you, Emma.
Thank you, Elijah.
Yeah. Thank you.